ready on the on your end there in the room. I think given the number of folks who are here, we'll probably go ahead and get going and hope that Commissioner Daubenberger is able to join us when she becomes free.
Madam Chair, yes, we do. I can see you and hear you. I just got a message from Commissioner Daubenberger that she had to restart her computer and she'll be joining virtually. So we could probably start and she'll be joining momentarily.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will go ahead and call to order the meeting of the Environmental Review Implementation Subcommittee, or ERIS, for, what is it today, Wednesday, October 19th. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Stroman. I'm the Commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources and the Chair of ERIS. Eric, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to call the roll. And we'll do the subcommittee first, and then I believe we have some board members here who aren't formally part of the subcommittee, but we welcome and appreciate your participation here today.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you.
All right. I'll call the roll. Member Commissioner Grace Arnold.
Hi, I'm here.
Board Member Joseph Bauer-Kemper.
Here, yep.
Commissioner Daubenberger. Board Member Riley Hintz. Come back to her. Assistant Commissioner Peter Tester.
Here.
Assistant Commissioner Daniel Huff.
Here, thank you.
Let's see, Board Member Paul Nelson in the. He said present. We're turning on his microphone. And then Commissioner Stroman, also here.
I'm here.
Commissioner Alice Roberts Davis.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
Let's try Board Member Riley Hintz again.
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, yes. Not sure if I see anyone. Let's see, it looks like Commissioner Daubenberger might be back on now.
Back on, and now it looks like I'm a panelist and able to speak. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. Madam Chair. Oh, maybe Board Member Gerald Van Amber. We couldn't hear him before. I see that he's on. Looks like also Deputy Commissioner Kevin McKinnon is on. Not able to hear a response from him.
Kevin, are you able to unmute and just say hello?
Eric, Jerry Van Amber, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I finally found the problem after a long time.
All right, thank you. Board Member Van Amber.
Yeah, thank you.
Deputy Commissioner McKinnon. Okay, Madam Chair, I think that's all we have right now. Haven't heard Deputy Commissioner McKinnon, but he appears here and online.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I could hear Deputy Commissioner McKinnon's microphone open up, and I could hear some background noise. We could not hear your voice, Kevin. So Not sure what's going on there, but we'll hope that that will resolve so that we can hear any comments you have on the contents of the meeting today. I do just want to say thank you to our staff and all of the members for bearing with us, and anyone from the public who might be here with us today, bearing with us on this hybrid subcommittee meeting. Commissioner Daubenberger, you did a great job, and the staff team on the actual board meeting. I'm hoping this one will go smoothly as well. I have the pleasure of being up in the DNR's Duluth office. Was doing a campus visit with my son at UMD this morning, and now am happily settled in DNR's Duluth office. So appreciate that sometimes we can still do these hybrid meetings. So we will move to the next part of the agenda, which is approval of the consent agenda. We do have a quorum, so we should be able to move on this. And the items on the consent agenda are the meeting minutes from the ERIS meeting of April 20th, 2022. Hopefully folks can find that on page 4 of your packet. And then we also have the proposed agenda for today, October 19th, which is on page 1 of the packet. So at this time, we would be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll move Peter Tester.
I'll second Commissioner Arnold.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Tester and Commissioner Arnold. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, if folks who are virtual will please unmute your mics, and all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, I hear no opposition. The motion carries and the consent agenda is adopted. So I will turn it over to our interim executive director, Eric Cedarleaf Dahl, for the executive director's report.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to just give a couple of EQB announcements and then go through some logistics for today's hybrid meeting. One of our announcements is that EQB kicked off a continuous improvement project with MAD, the Management Analysis and Development at MMB. And ERIS and the board will hear an update on that, on the timeline, scope, and et cetera in the coming months. This project will be led by Kayla Walsh with support from Denise Wilson. There's one item on the agenda today. Denise Wilson will give a presentation on environmental review and climate pilot program conclusions and recommendations, but a few logistics and best practices for today's meeting. Since today is a hybrid meeting, many people are online and some are in person. Throughout the meeting, we'll do our best to keep both the in-person participants and the online participants in mind and facilitate a smooth experience for everyone. For those of you in the room, please use the handheld microphone at the comment table when speaking so everyone online can hear you, and this meeting is being recorded. Board members, you have an opportunity to ask questions of the presenters during each of today's agenda items. I want to emphasize that we hope we have a good discussion today, and we are looking to get feedback from you and let us know we're on the right track and what staff should be thinking about. Please state your name each time before you speak. This ensures that people joining remotely can more easily follow the conversation. For those of you online, please keep your camera on as much as possible. We know this. There may be time when you need to turn your camera off, but keeping it on as much as possible helps to stay connected and have a meaningful and productive conversation. So for members of the public, there will be an opportunity for public comment on today's agenda. If you plan to comment, please read the procedures and guidelines for public comment on page 2 of the packet. If you can go to the next slide, Kayla. Next slide will show some procedures and guidelines of how to comment online. You can raise your hand in WebEx or type your name in the chat, and then we'll pass that on to the chair. We use that raise hand feature. You can also, let's see, if you wish to speak, rather, press the raise hand button and indicate. Let's see if we can go to the next slide. That shows where the raise hand feature is. To ensure we can accommodate as many commenters as possible, please press that raise hand button in WebEx and keep it raised until after you give your public comment. We'll queue commenters once we arrive at that point in the agenda. For those of you in person, we have a sign-up sheet at the welcome table, and if you have not yet signed up, please do so now. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Dahl. I am going to go ahead and introduce our next item. And as you noted, it's really the main or only item we have on the ERIS agenda today. And for this item, Denise Wilson is going to give an update on the Environmental Review and Climate Pilot Program and the conclusions that we've reached in that. So Denise, I'm going to hand it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. For members of the audience, my name is Denise Wilson, and I work for the Environmental Quality Board as the director of the State Environmental Review Program. Next slide, please. In my presentation, I will give a brief reminder of the purpose, timeline, and milestones for this project, followed by a discussion of the pilot design and implementation activities. And finally, I will present the Interagency Climate Technical Team conclusions from the pilot feedback, as well as recommendations for next steps. Next slide, please. Before I begin, here are two terms that I will frequently use in this presentation. The responsible governmental units, or RGUs, are state and local governments with delegated authority to prepare environmental review program documents. Also, an Environmental Assessment Worksheet, or EAW, is the Environmental Review Program document used by all RGUs to evaluate the environmental effects of a proposed project, to provide information to the public, and includes necessary information for decisions on the project's potential for significant environmental effects. Next slide, please. Throughout 2018 and 2019, EQB staff received feedback from members of the public that climate change was not consistently considered in environmental assessment worksheets. We also received requests for guidance from state and local government agencies, project proposers, and technical consultants for how to consider potential climate effects in required environmental review documents. In addition, climate change was identified as a potentially significant environmental issue by the legislature when they passed the Minnesota Next Generation Energy Act in 2007, by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and by board members when approving their biennial work plan in 2019, and also by Governor Walz in his Executive Order 19-37. Next slide, please. Acknowledging the importance of providing usable information about potential climate effects related to a proposed project, the board convened an interagency climate technical team in the fall of 2019 and tasked them with evaluating the effectiveness of the requirements of the State Environmental Review Program. The climate technical team includes EQB member agency staff with environmental review program expertise, as well as climate science expertise. In 2020, the climate technical team spent time developing guiding principles and strategies, researching how other state environmental review programs are considering climate change, and deliberating over what climate information is needed and what information is possible given existing tools and resources. They proposed draft recommendations for environmental review program changes in December of 2020. Starting in January of 2021, EQB staff implemented a process to get public feedback on the draft recommendations. The climate technical team considered that feedback and proposed final recommendations to the board in September of 2021. Based on concerns raised in the feedback and the climate technical team's final recommendations, the board convened a subcommittee to design a pilot to get more information on the proposed changes to the Environmental Assessment Worksheet form. In 2022, EQB staff implemented the pilot program designed by the subcommittee and collected 9 months of feedback from pilot participants. Next slide, please. The climate technical team's final recommendation for changes to the Environmental Assessment Worksheet form included new questions for greenhouse gas quantification and assessment, and prompts in existing questions for providing adaptation and resilience information about the proposed project. The climate technical team also developed a guidance document to support effective implementation of these proposed changes. Next slide, please. In anticipation of reporting the results of the pilot program and a revised EAW to the board in December, I will present an overview of the pilot design, implementation activities, and results to get your input on whether feedback from the pilot indicates that changes should be made to the Environmental Assessment Worksheet form before board consideration in December, and discuss any suggestions that you think should be included in the resolution for supporting the effective implementation of the revised EAW form. These could include, for example, a phased implementation schedule or a directive for developing additional guidance. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the pilot program was not implemented to decide whether climate information should be included in the EAW form, but rather to consider what climate information can be efficiently provided that will effectively result in describing potential climate effects on and from proposed projects that require environmental review. Next slide, please. The pilot program was designed to understand if concerns from those opposed to the recommended EAW form changes are actual barriers before broad implementation. The purpose of the pilot was to learn what is working or not working as RGUs complete the draft revised EAW form. To better understand the effectiveness of the requested climate information, to identify additional resources and guidance that may be needed to ensure confidence with the climate information, and to understand if adjustments are needed to the EAW form that might improve its effectiveness. Next slide, please. The pilot design included a targeted recruitment and outreach strategy with a strong focus on engagement with greater Minnesota local governments. To provide support and technical assistance, EQB staff hosted a monthly speaker series and cohort meetings. The speaker series included speakers with expertise in available greenhouse gas calculators, climate resources, and tools, speakers with diverse perspectives, including an environmental advocate who often reviews environmental assessment worksheets, and also included a panel of legal experts that discussed their considerations when developing administrative records of decision based on information included on the EAW form. Registered participants received invitations to attend monthly cohort meetings that provided opportunities to ask more detailed questions of speakers and share information about their experience using the draft revised EAW form. Both of these meetings included opportunities for participants to share their thoughts and provide feedback. The pilot design included the development of surveys to ensure a consistent approach and broad opportunities for providing feedback. And the pilot also included the development of indicators and metrics to establish a basis for consistently assessing the feedback. Next slide, please. The pilot was implemented from January through September 30th of this year. Next slide, please. More information on pilot recruitment, support, and engagement can be found starting on page 5 of the memo included in this meeting packet. As part of the recruitment, support, and engagement strategy, EQB staff published 38 pilot program registration announcements in the EQB Monitor newsletter with an average 4,308 average subscribers. EQB staff made 102 direct phone calls to encourage participation to local governments. 66 of those calls were to local governments in greater Minnesota and 36 to metro area local governments. There were 105 registered participants that included 27 local governments, all 8 responsible governmental units, and 34 different consulting firms that represent technical consultants that often are tasked with preparing the technical analysis included in the environmental assessment worksheets. The speaker series had 309 total participants. The cohort meeting hosted 164 total participants. Surveys were sent to project proposers, RGUs, and consultants that published environmental assessment worksheets that used the draft revised form, including the climate information. Surveys were also sent to anyone submitting comments on a project reviewed using the draft revised EAW, and there was also a survey available on the EQB webpage. Next slide, please. More information on the metrics can be found on page 4 of the memo, including in the meeting packet. For the purposes of the pilot program, effectiveness is defined as the EAW form accurately and consistently provides usable climate information to project proposers, RGUs, and members of the public. Efficiency is defined as the ability of the project proposer to supply any data reasonably requested by the RGU, and the ability of the RGU to comply with the environmental review procedures in a cost-effective and timely manner, relevant to project-specific needs. Survey questions were developed using indicators for effectiveness and efficiency. In addition to conversations during speaker and cohort meetings and one-on-one questions during phone calls, feedback was primarily submitted through these surveys that were sent out after the project notices were published in the EQB Monitor, and like I said, available on the EQB project webpage. Next slide, please. More information about the projects that were evaluated using the draft revised EAW form can be found on page 7 of the memo in the meeting packet. In total, 14 of the 76 EAWs published during the pilot used the draft revised EAW form, including climate information. These included most project types reviewed in an average year for this period, except for examples of animal feedlots and highway projects. Included a typical distribution of state and local governments, governmental units preparing the EAWs, and a typical number of projects located in greater Minnesota. Next slide, please. More detailed information about the conclusions and recommendations can be found starting on page 1 of the memo in the meeting packet. The climate technical team conclusions were developed with consideration of feedback from project proposers, responsible governmental units, RGUs, technical consultants, and members of the public that participated in the development and review of published EAWs using the draft revised EAW form. While we hope to gather a robust set of information, we recognized going into the pilot that there were limitations to the amount and type of information we could obtain. The information collected did not answer all questions, nor did it validate or disprove effectiveness or efficiency. Much of the information collected was based on who volunteered to participate, what project types were proposed in the time period of the pilot, and who responded to the surveys. Therefore, all elements of pilot implementation activities were considered, including an observation of the limited amount of feedback identifying any potential barriers or challenges. Next slide, please. In total, 85 surveys were sent. The responses to the surveys are included in the appendix of the memo in the meeting packet. Some key takeaways to note are the pilot provided many opportunities for submitting feedback. However, most feedback received was limited to responses on the surveys. There was good participation in the speaker sessions and cohort meetings. There was a small number of projects relative to the total number of projects that were published that used the draft revised EAW form. And there were variable response rates from the surveys, such that there really wasn't, the results weren't conclusive that indicated whether it was efficient or effective, but they were good indicators of whether or not folks had challenges. Feedback gathered was largely qualitative in nature, and the feedback that we did get didn't resolve the different underlying viewpoints about the purpose and value of the climate information. Next slide, please. So in summary, the feedback indicated that all questions on the draft revised EAW form were able to be answered. Most survey responses were supportive or neutral, indicated a desire for sector or source-specific guidance, agreed that the new climate questions on the EAW form are clear and unambiguous, that project proposers and consultants can complete data portions of the EAW, and there were no specific suggestions for revisions to questions on the EAW form. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the climate technical team the climate technical team concluded, based on their assessment of this feedback, that the pilot program design and implementation were effective. The pilot included a diverse range of projects. EAWs accurately and consistently provided usable climate information, and RGUs were able to comply with environmental review procedures. Next slide, please. Therefore, the climate technical team recommends that the board approval of the draft revised EAW form as described in the fall 2021 final climate technical team recommendations, and that the board direct EQB staff to continue working with member agencies to update the guidance. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you to the entire technical team for, conducting the pilot and then really taking the time to not only do the analysis of what we learned, but provide the subcommittee here with a very thorough memo of the findings. At this point, what I'd like to do is, as Denise said, have her be available for any clarifying questions from ERIS members or EQB board members. I'll just note that we'll start with the clarifying questions, and then we're going to move to public comment. And then the subcommittee will have additional time following the public comment to actually deliberate on the recommendations that the technical team has made here and any other advice that we wish to forward to the full board. But I think it will be beneficial to have the public comment, have that benefit of that public comment in that deliberation. So Eric, I'd like to start if there are any clarifying questions from members in the room there. And then if folks online have clarifying questions for Denise, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll be able to see those too.
Madam Chair, I've got member Paul Nelson here in the room that has a question.
Member Nelson.
Chair, I have a question.
See, Member Nelson, I'm not able to hear you. I don't know if others online are or not, but I know I'm not.
Well, maybe I have to get really close.
Okay, there, that's much better. We
Right.
need to at least make sure Denise can hear the question because she's going to be the one to answer it. Looks like she can hear you now.
Madam Chair and Denise, question on the conclusion about usable information. In the packet on page 3, under that discussion or topic where it asked about conclusion 3 and provided usable climate information, the discussion is blank. So I'm wondering if you could clarify the basis for that conclusion.
Madam Chair, Member Nelson, yes, actually the reason that those are grouped, and it appears that the third conclusion is blank, is that the survey questions were designed to respond to both of those points. And so what the summary below that applies to both of those points.
Member Nelson, does that answer your question?
Madam Chair, that clarifies for this time. I may have some
Okay,
during discussion.
perfect. Thank you. Any other members have clarifying questions for Denise on her presentation or the memo in the packet? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, and I'm getting concurrence on that. So let's go ahead and move to the public comment section then. We will follow the public comment procedures and the guidelines provided. And I know in the room, there are folks who have signed up in person. We'll start with those folks. And then we will move to anyone in WebEx who is a member of the public who would like to provide comment. And, you know, depending, I think as Director Dahl said in the beginning, we were intending to limit comments to about 2 minutes. I'm not sure how many folks we have at this moment, but again, if you could keep your remarks concise, but we do want to hear from you. So I think we have Tony Quillis in the room who would like to share something with ERIS. Welcome, Mr. Quillis. It's nice to see you virtually.
Commissioner, I hope you're having fun up in Duluth. I hope the weather is getting better up there also. But before I start, I do have to give a shout out to Eric and the technical staff here to be able to pull this off. I was actually here to be able to see it in person, and I'm very impressed with it since I'm not a techie myself. But Madam Chair, I will try and be brief in my comments on the proposal before you today. There are some concerns and comments and observations I'd like to make about the pilot program. And the first one is mainly about the statistics and data that came about from the pilot project. Unfortunately, only 14 projects were evaluated in the timeline from January to September. And I'm not sure if that's due to COVID, due to market conditions, but there was only 14 projects that were able to access and go through and use the draft revised form. And of those projects, they're limited in areas of project type: creek mitigation, wastewater treatment facilities, apartment complex, habitat restoration. And as Denise pointed out, there wasn't an agriculture or highway transportation projects involved in that. Also, very limited amount of projects in greater Minnesota. I think just from my count, about 8-10 of them are from mainly the metropolitan area. So I think this leads us to worry about a one-size-fits-all when we put this question in the Environmental Assessment Worksheet. As a society, you know, we're reluctant for polling and surveys, right? Especially now during this election season. Nobody wants to pick up their phone and talk about what their favorite election topic is. After you order from Amazon, usually you get the follow-up email. How was your experience at Amazon? Or you go on US Bank or Wells Fargo. How did you like your Wells Fargo experience? We're just kind of reluctant to do that. And EQB staff did a great job of trying to tease out, if you will, from these 14 people who used this revised form. And unfortunately, there just wasn't a lot of data or response there. And even, I'm going to quote from the report, it may not provide complete or unambiguous answers to all the questions members of the board may have about changes to the EAW form. But of those responses that they were able to tease out, I think the most interesting responses are from state RGUs, and they're the most telling. Not clear what details are being requested. Not clear what details will be useful. Questions asked the project proposer to estimate greenhouse gas emissions from equipment that isn't running yet and has not been chosen because the project has not been bid out and contractors selected. Lots of unavoidable guesswork. Multiple unknowns about equipment, duration, and other needs that may occur and for changes during the project. So just some concerns there, and those were just from state RGUs, and there's other ones in there from project proposers also. One of the questions also dealt with complexity. And if you look at it, there was only 9 responses, but of those 5, they talked about how it was much more complex or a little bit more difficult to answer those. When we talk about environmental permitting and environmental review in the state of Minnesota, there's kind of 3 things that I always hear from our members: time, cost, and uncertainty. And one of the questions also was, in the survey was, did this add any more time or cost to your proposals? And so if you looked at some of the responses, one of them was for total, putting together the total EAW, 134 hours, of which 15 hours were on climate assessment. 20 range of $20,000 to $150,000 for total cost for the entire EAW. One of the estimates was another $1,700 for just the climate assessment alone. Another one was another 2 to 3 weeks to a project to get all the data they needed to assemble to answer the new questions on there. When I talk to our members that haven't gone through this process, but just ask them, if you went through this for a particular project, what would your cost estimates be? And those cost estimates are anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 is what I've been hearing. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but to a smaller, medium-sized business that's looking to expand or locate here in Minnesota, that could be a make or break deal. So I want you to think about that. And then Ms. Wilson also talked about the guidance documents, and state agencies talked about some of the quotes were confusing. There's lots of them. They're difficult to follow. And I think staff has acknowledged that we maybe need to go back and look at some of those guidance documents. Madam Chair, I think maybe that it might be good for us to pause, reflect, and reevaluate where we're at right now in terms of the pilot project, just because there's just the data's just not there right now. So maybe extending the pilot project to go through, I think would be a good thing for the committee to consider. So, Madam Chair, thank you very much. I'm not sure if other people have comments, but I will be sticking around in the room, and if you have any other questions, I can always pop back up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quillis, for those comments. We appreciate it. Director Dahl, do we have others in the room there who would like to make comments?
Madam Chair, not at this time.
Okay. I am not seeing hands raised online, but I'm going to ask staff to verify that that's what they're seeing as well.
Madam Chair, sorry, I was trying to unmute. We do have one hand raised, Amelia Voss.
Oh, perfect. Yes, I do see Amelia now. All right. Amelia, welcome to ERIS.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I am Amelia Voss. I'm an attorney at Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And just a few thoughts. So, I think if we reflect on where we've been when we decided to do this pilot, there was a lot of concern that this would be really hard, that it would be really time intensive, that it would be really costly. And looking at the data from the pilot, it seems like that didn't really come to bear, that people found this doable, that the tools were usable. It actually didn't add, a huge time and expense. And I think that's great. I think the pilot was useful in really investigating whether people's fears came true. And the good news is we found that it really didn't, that this was a doable addition to the EAW. And so, at this point, we did a 9-month pilot to try and balance, the need to gather some information and try this out and, see how this would work with the urgency of needing to add this to the form. It's an urgent environmental issue that we need to start working on. It's addressing climate change is a huge component of state law and current state policy, the governor's climate framework. And so, we don't have a lot of time to wait to move forward, but I'd also just like to, remind everyone that it's already required to analyze all of the environmental effects that a project may have, including its climate impacts. So this process is really about adding questions and clarity and guidance to what that analysis that's already legally required looks like. And so I think we're at a point in time where it makes sense to move this form forward and to start utilizing this in environmental review more broadly. And the reason I say that is because I think if you look at the data that Ms. Wilson presented and that the technical team collected, additional time in the pilot isn't going to garner much additional information. And there's a couple of reasons why. First, I think you'll see that the outreach to local units of government to participate was robust. Ms. Wilson and her team really followed up and tried to get local units of government to participate in this pilot. And so I think, the technical team has found those people who are going to participate in the pilot. One thing about small municipalities is that they don't have projects that go through environmental review all that often. And so this pilot could go on for, 5 more years, and you still wouldn't necessarily have that many projects that go through environmental review in smaller towns in greater Minnesota. And that's just the virtue of what projects go through environmental review and where they commonly happen. I also just want to touch on, some things that were in the presentation and that Mr. Quillis highlighted. So, there were 6 project types that used the pilot form. Again, in a given year in environmental review, we only see maybe 13 project types go through environmental review. So it's not, that 6 really isn't that small of a number when you think about the diversity of projects that go through environmental review in a year. And there weren't any feedlot or highway and transportation projects that went through because at least as to feedlots, the Pollution Control Agency has its own feedlot form that it uses. And this was a pilot of the general form. And so there was feedlots that certainly went through environmental review, but the Pollution Control Agency purposefully wasn't using this pilot form for that. So extending the pilot isn't going to garner information about how this applies to feedlots. So all of that is to say, I think that we've gotten what we can out of a pilot. And I don't really see a path forward where extending this pilot for an additional period of time is really going to loop in a greater diversity of projects, more projects in greater Minnesota, or a lot more data to utilize, simply because, it's a virtue of what projects go through environmental review and where they go through it. And so I think we're at a juncture where it really makes sense to go forward with the good work that's been put together by the technical team and move that into the standard EAW form broadly. And, this doesn't have to be the end of the discussion. I don't think anybody thinks we should move this into the form and close the book and never think about it again. But I think we're at a place where it makes sense to move to a fully implemented form with a climate analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Voss. Appreciate those comments. Just pausing a moment to see if we have any other hands raised virtually. I'm going to assume we didn't have more people walk into the room, but I will double check on that. And Eric, I think you're indicating there are no additional folks in the room who wish to comment, and there are no additional folks online who wish to comment. So I will conclude the public forum piece of this meeting, and again, thank both Ms. Voss and Mr. Quillis for providing their input for the subcommittee to consider during our deliberation and thoughts we want to forward to the full board. So at this time, we will go ahead and move into that subcommittee discussion and deliberation. And again, I'll just, I think we've got it here on the slide. If you're looking for the recommendations from the Interagency Climate Technical Team. They are on page 2 of the memo. And I think our charge as the slide here is to provide our thoughts on the team's recommendation and anything else we want to share based on the information in the memo or other things that we think the full board should consider when this goes to them. So I will open up the floor. It looks like Assistant Commissioner Huff has his hand up. Why don't you go ahead, and then Commissioner Daubenberger can be next.
Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
I can hear you now.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. I guess I had a question for staff, Ms. Wilson. So the first commenter seemed to differ in what I understand to be your conclusions of, did we get enough data? And I just wanted to explore that a little bit and get a little bit more information on, why your analysis is that we did. And I think part of it is, we want to make sure that data is representative. We want to make sure that data that we gather are going to fill in the gaps, and they're going to be enough of a sample size that we think we've covered our bases. In your report, it seems to conclude that we do, and I wonder if you just comment on that and maybe alleviate some of the concerns raised by the first commenter. How did the work team and you as the lead of that work team come to the conclusion that we do have enough data that it was represented? Thank you.
Ms. Wilson.
Madam Chair and board member Huff, it is one of the challenges that the climate technical team spent a lot of time deliberating and trying to determine whether or not we had sufficient information to draw conclusions. You're right, it was a small percentage, only 18% of the projects that were published used the draft revised form. One of the reasons that we had the small percentages, most projects take 4 to 6 months, and EIW will take 4 to 6 months. So there were, starting in January, a lot of projects already underway. And it would have delayed those projects if they had switched forms. And then we looked at, so of the 14 that went through, were they sort of representative, like you were saying, of what we would typically see for the period of time? And that's the slide that I showed, how those 14 sort of weighed out with what we would typically see. And we felt it was a good representation. We also looked at sort of what didn't come forward. Like, we had so many opportunities to provide feedback on the challenges, and we didn't really hear from folks that there was a large scale problem with the way that the process was being implemented, or concerns that were raised from those folks that went through the process. There were, you're right, to Mr. Quillis's point, there were a few commenters that shared concerns, but given even of the 14, 85 surveys went out, and 14 to project proposers, to RGUs, to technical consultants, and of that, only a couple of commenters had concerns. So the technical team felt that just because someone, that everyone had the opportunity, should issues be prevalent, that we would have had an indication of that as a concern. And so it was both what we heard and what we didn't hear that came into our conclusions and were considerations of our conclusions. And so I think both of the, Mr. Quillis and Ms. Vaz are correct that it isn't, every project didn't go through, but there's also the concern that if we do go through with a voluntary approach in the pilot, would more projects actually volunteer to use the form? And would we actually get more information? We also looked at the response rates for the surveys where people were given the opportunity and didn't answer all the questions or chose not to even complete the survey. Generally, we believe that if someone had a concern or there was a problem, they would have taken that opportunity to raise it. So, so to your point, Assistant Commissioner Huff, we feel like there's enough information as indicators, whether it's conclusive data, and whether or not going forward we would end up with conclusive data, we can't be sure. But we feel there's enough indicators to support a decision and to make a conclusion.
Denise, this is Chair Stroman, and maybe just to follow on that, I want to check my recollection with your opinion, but my recollection of this, as we embarked on this pilot and the subcommittee and ultimately the board decided to go this route, it really was more to gather that kind of information with the hope that it was representative, with the hope that we would learn more about the concerns we were hearing, learn more about the opportunities that we were hearing about, and that knowing it was a voluntary pilot of limited duration, my recollection is we didn't expect to necessarily end up with a scientific survey or a statistically valid data set, but rather we intended to end up with something more along the lines of what we got. It would have been great if more folks had voluntarily, decided to participate. It would have been great if more people had filled out the survey, but I think we went into that understanding that this might well be the case in the way we designed the pilot. Is that, I just would appreciate your perspective. That's sort of my recollection on it. And so I was not overly surprised by this. And I think, to Mr. Quill's point that, and Ms. Voss made this point too, right? There's still more to learn. There's clearly more to learn as we continue through this process. I think that's obvious, but I was not personally overly surprised by sort of the volume and the number of responses we got and the level of participation.
Madam Chair, your recollection is the same as mine. And I will just add to it that it was, we always knew too that the pilot would be more narrowly focused. We, when we presented our draft recommendations, we went out for a 6-month public engagement process on what was being proposed and got over 1,000 comments and drew conclusions. We assessed those conclusions and provided that feedback in the final recommendation. So the focus of the pilot program was really just to hear back from anyone that wanted to try out the form and to give us feedback on their experience. So it was a very narrow sort of pool of reflections. And so for that purpose, of the 14 brave RGUs and project proposers and technical consultants, and even members of the public who took the time to share comments and then fill out surveys, we want to respect that their investment was meaningful too, and the information they provided to us was helpful in drawing the conclusions that we did.
Thank you. I'd like to call on Commissioner Daubenberger, and then we'll go to the room and see who has comments there. Commissioner Daubenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just thought I'd provide a MnDOT perspective, especially since it was already noted that there weren't any transportation projects as part of the pilot, and MnDOT did not have any projects starting their EAW process after the pilot approval date back in September of 21, and that would be completed during this pilot program. but we have anticipated this emerging topic, of course, of climate change and the integration and environmental review, and we've been preparing for this. And we've examined the form and did not see any showstoppers with the revised form moving forward. But we do recognize the current lack of requirements or set standards that would delineate environmental thresholds that would assist in decision making on alternatives and any mitigation needed. So it'll continue to be a learning process, and there will be a continual need to evolve guidance, but we do support this EQB effort.
Thank you for those thoughts. Board Member Nelson.
Madam Chair, I will see if I can be cohesive about this. Number of thoughts. I wasn't here for.
And I'm going to just remind you, you're going to need to be super close to the microphone.
Yep. I feel like
Sorry
I'm
about that.
ruling on it already. So. But I do want to commend staff for their work on this. I reviewed the EAW form and before I retired, I found it largely understandable. I am have a couple concerns. So I have to sequence or compartmentalize this analysis. Every time we choose to do something or regulate that we're getting useful information and it's cost. So I am a little bit stuck on the usefulness. Noticed that there were a few people that said the information may be specific to that type of project and so forth. So I'm wondering a little bit, is the continuous improvement program at that stage where we can say that will provide some improvement or ability to adjust the form in somewhat near term, say 6 months or a year, if we continue to collect feedback information, or is that yet to be developed? Or is that something we can talk about when we consider the form, that timely feedback in 6 months or 12 months as we gather more? And as for compartmentalizing, it's my understanding that the decision to include information, this information has already been made. What we're considering in December for the board is the form. And so I did find the form understandable. Most of the people filling it out acknowledged that. And so I do support the form at this point, but I would like to know about it.
So thank you, Member Nelson. And I don't know if others online were having the same problem. I did not catch every word you said, but I think what I heard you say is that, reiterating the point is not, the board's already made the decision. We want to do something. And so the point of the pilot was not to assess whether or not we include climate information, but whether or not the form is useful and clear. And you made the point that you think it is clear and people can fill it out. Your question was more about is the information useful? And with the continuous improvement work that we're doing, I think your question was about what are the next steps for points of review and assessment and evaluation with respect to the usefulness of the information. I just want to make sure that I heard that correctly and that others did too if they were suffering the same problem I was.
Madam Chair, I think you got it.
Awesome. Okay, I was hearing better than I thought then. Ms. Wilson, is that something that maybe you could provide some response on? I think it would maybe be good to hear what the technical team, if there were thoughts on that notion of continuous improvement or continued evaluation and reflection what that process might look like or timetable might look like.
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. Member Nelson also, the continuous improvement project that we're talking about, I think is really looking at what other initiatives might be warranted to ensure that the environmental review program stays effective. So it'll really be more high level at looking at similar projects to the one that we're talking about right now, where it's, you know, climate and environmental review. However, to the point of, you know, whether or not we continue to collect information and how we collect that information, you know, the climate technical team felt that that would be really helpful if there was some mechanism to continue to be available to folks if the form were approved. You know, that would clearly give us more information because more project proposers and RGUs would be using the form, and so we would be able to collect that information, you know, more comprehensively and to get better feedback. I think we're open to that. EQB staff is open to doing something like that. We just would like to make sure that, you know, we have the capacity to be able to collect the information that you all feel would be helpful, and to get your thoughts on what information, you know, beyond what we're doing now, do you think would be helpful as we go forward? And the other point I'll make is, unlike rulemaking that takes years and is a state-led, you know, a state-level process, a legal process, the board actually can change the form at any meeting. And so, and according to the rules, the chair could actually make the change, but historically, the chair has made the determination that this should be a public board process to avoid any change, to implement any changes to the EAW form. So yes, we would love to hear your thoughts and reflections, ERIS members, on what additional information you think would be really important as we go forward, and maybe what are those milestones or inflection points that you think would be critical for us to bring back information to you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. And Member Nelson, does that help answer your question? I mean, I think too it would be helpful whether there's folks on this committee who have ideas on that timetable or points of what we want to see in the review. I do just think that that's something, whether it's ideas from this group or whether this group directs staff to bring that back to the board when the form comes back for consideration. I do think that's an important element. And I think to the point Mr. Quillis made about certainty versus uncertainty, you know, clearly it's nobody's intent to change the form every board meeting. And so I think the more we can set out that process about when we tend to review it and evaluate and look at potential changes, you know, the better to create some level of certainty. But Member Nelson, I don't know if you have additional thoughts on what you would like to see or if others do. And I also know that Member Bauer Kemper has his hand up, so we'll move there too. But I want to give you a chance, Member Nelson, to finish your thread.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know that I have specific things. I'm certain that some of this was discussed as you started, as to say whether or not there's a possibility to have some sort of decision tree as to whether some of the questions are triggered or not for certain projects. Related quite closely to the project in here that was about stream bank stabilization. That's what I did a lot of. And I wouldn't find the information generated very, very useful for that type of project. And so is there a way to have some decision trees? And maybe part of that is, and staff could answer this, is I know that the RGUs have a certain amount of discretion in the completion of EAWs as well. There are a number of EAWs that were turned into mini EISs in terms of information at the discretion of use some of that to avoid doing an EIS at some point. But some of that could be handled by the discretion too, and maybe discussion of how much discretion there is. Solve some of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bauer Kemper.
Yeah, thank you. So this is Joseph Bauer Kemper from the public member from the 8th. I don't want to derail Member Nelson's discussion there about the decision tree idea and the RGU discretion. So, I don't have a comment on that, but I'm intrigued by it. So I want to make sure that sits here for us to continue to consider. The thoughts that came to mind as Denise was just speaking moments ago in response to those questions was, I see several times in the memo references to a very likely need for project-specific guidance and resources, the continued development of those things. A lot of the concerns that came up in the surveys, it looks like the interagency technical team felt that those could be addressed through project-specific guidance and assistance and resources. And so I think it'll be important to continue to develop and make available those things, whether those are like static resources that exist or whether EQB staff is available to engage as this process continues for each project. So I'm curious, Denise, if you have anything to say about how the very likely need for ongoing assistance and guidance for specific projects, is there a good way to couple that with gathering information about the effectiveness and utility of the form? Because it seems like the need for ongoing guidance and support is probably going to be, or the source for ongoing guidance and support is probably going to be a good source for information. So are there ways to I don't know, to put those efforts together, to link those efforts in a mutually productive way? And then I'll also add this tangent that I'm intrigued by the idea of, if this form were to be implemented, to setting a timeline for revisiting the form, a year later, not necessarily to revise the form, but just to take in a report from the technical staff, to go ahead and queue that up from the get-go so that we know this is coming, so that the board can be prepared and the staff can be prepared to have that discussion in a really meaningful way. Thanks.
Ms. Wilson.
Madam Chair, Member Bauer Kemper, thank you for that question. I think part of the challenge that we had with the feedback that we received through surveys was that it is sort of one direction, and there's really no way to validate. Like, we could hear that, this was going to be $100,000, to do this, but we wouldn't really have any way to validate the feedback that we were receiving. And so it's challenging to sort of use that information for more than just an indicator that, we can see trends, we can see, the number of people who have similar responses, but to just use that example as sort of an indicator of the failure of the form or the difficulty with the form, that was challenging for us to consider that. And then, it would be helpful to know, again, what information was missing and what information do you think would be important to help with the decision making on whether or not the form is effective, whether or not the questions, are getting at the sort of usable climate information. Understanding that, part of, again, the challenge with environmental review is usable information depends on your lens. Members of the public use the information much differently than project proposers or RGUs. And so how do we want to make sure we balance the need for this information for all of the sort of participants, for all of the folks who are looking to use that information. So I think your question was whether or not we could continue to collect information, and I think we could, but we'd really like to be very targeted in how we go forward. And then also it would be, we could definitely bring that information back on a recurring basis and report out on that. We'd just like to be, strategic about it.
Member Bauer Kemper, looks like you have a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So Denise, right. So yes, this gets at my question. I'm wondering if there's a way also to connect the gathering of information to the likelihood that folks will need assistance and support, because I'm anticipating that that'll be some of the same entities, some of the same people, some of the same RGUs that have feedback and could benefit from guidance and resources. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that possibility and how the EQB could be prepared for the work of providing the support and guidance and also for the work of gathering information. Thank you.
Oh, Madam Chair, Member Bauer Camper, sorry, that was the second part of your question. And the answer, the challenge with the guidance, and I think what you saw in the feedback too, is that there's a desire for more sector specific and more technical guidance. And so the challenge with that is EQB's role. Our guidance was developed to provide information that informed those RGU decisions, because the responsible governmental unit preparing the document has the discretion to decide what information is included on the form and how that information is assessed. And so we have to make sure that EQB isn't being directive and telling the RGU how they have to do the analysis, but presenting them with options and opportunities and resources. But again, what you saw in the feedback was they want that specific guidance that tells them exactly what to do. So that also is a challenge if we were to go forward. How do we get information, from technical experts to help, these government decisions on a project specific basis? And so, oftentimes there's local units of government want state agencies to sort of help provide those technical expertise and those resources. But again, if that technical expert from that state agency were to weigh in on a decision from a local unit of government, and there was a challenge to that decision, then that makes a very complex legal situation, because they would be drawn in as part of that appeal that would be, taken to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. So to this point, there has been some reluctance to sort of close that gap and provide that specific information. At EQB staff, we do not have like that technical expertise in-house to be able to advise that RGU specifically. And so I think that's part of the frustration is, trying to get the information, know what the right information is, and what are trusted sources that they should use based on a project specific need, which is really their delegated authority to decide.
Do you have a follow-up on that, Member Bauer Kemper? Otherwise, I know Commissioner Daubenberger has another comment. I'm not sure if it's on this topic or another one.
No, thank you. I think we can circle back to it. Maybe I need to think through the response there and try to, come up with some ideas. But I'd certainly love to hear from the commissioners about this kind of tension that Ms. Wilson mentions and how EQB could potentially help mitigate that.
So now there's no pressure, Commissioner Daubenberger, to answer that one specifically, but feel free. Otherwise, whatever comment you're going to share with us would be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And no, it was related to this and thinking through what was just discussed here. But, I agree it would be good to have a plan that sets forth a process for the EAW form updates and something that could outline how updates to the form can be made, the frequency of process to make those, and also then the supporting guidance to go along with that, since the guidance and form updates would go hand in hand. But I just wanted to mention too, the idea has been floated out there for discussion among EQB staff that I've really liked about the idea of having an EQB ombudsman, so a neutral point of contact for those RGUs to go to on projects, and then the ombudsman could work to, seek some additional technical expertise. That could help with the challenge that we were just hearing about. That could, if we didn't have a structure like that in place, then there could be some legal challenges down the road. But having that neutral point of contact at the EQB as an ombudsman to kind of field those sorts of questions, concerns, need for additional guidance, I think would be something that we could further consider here.
Yeah, Commissioner Daubenberger, I think that's a good idea to introduce at this time. And I think, the way I look at we're kind of touching on two maybe related but separate issues, right? One is really about how do we get good technical information, guidance, and support to RGUs who are using this form. And I think that's where this idea of some neutral ombudsman or technical resource could be useful. And then the other piece is, how does the subcommittee and the EQB continue to get feedback in that spirit of adaptiveness and continuous improvement. And I think those things are related, but they're not actually the same function because they're different audiences, right? In one case, we're really the audience because the EQB is the keeper of the form. And in one case, the RGUs are really the audience. And so I think it would be helpful. And I would appreciate some, obviously we can continue to have more discussion here, but to me, I think it would be important for the interagency technical team to, in concert with their recommendations to the board on approval of the form, and they already have the recommendation about continued work on the guidance, to then what's the technical support piece to that guidance, and is it, an ombud's role? And then I think the third piece of this is, what is that review and evaluation process and timetable for the EQB? And part of that is, what do we think the right time interval is based on kind of the regular flow of environmental review work? Is a year sufficient to get a better snapshot? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? I don't know. Or maybe it's, a small review on a shorter timetable and a larger one at 5 years or something. I don't know. I'd be curious in the technical team's thoughts on that. And then the other piece is, how do we get the information that we want? And I think Denise's point on, is the information useful, being contingent on your perspective on this, is a really good one that we have to keep in mind, right? Because it might be useful or not useful depending on if you are a member of the public, or you are the RGU, or you are the project proposer. And I'd be curious, Denise, if you or others have thoughts on this. In the pilot, one of the things we did was sort of get all of those folks together. We had the speaker series. We got some feedback on the, kind of front end of that. Is there a way to do that on the review process without, unduly asking people to contribute time to this effort? But I think, to your point, it is important to get all of those perspectives if we're going to really evaluate that question that Member Nelson brought up about, is the information useful? Is it helping us make better decisions? Is it helping inform the people who need to be informed about it? So just curious if folks have thoughts on that for now. Otherwise, obviously, we can charge the technical team with thinking more about that.
Madam Chair, I can weigh in a little bit more about the sort of the idea that we've been kind of kicking around with this ombuds position, and why we kind of we're landing on that. The challenge, like I mentioned with the survey, is just getting feedback versus actually having like an engagement. And what we saw with the surveys is, they didn't necessarily, some people responded, not everyone did, and the results really weren't conclusive. However, if we had a designated, portion of someone's time that could sort of be at the table if there were disputes. You know, we know examples where projects where, you know, a member of the public maybe asked for information and that was ignored by, you know, a government agency. We ended up in litigation. Well, maybe that situation could have been resolved, you know, if EQB were able to bring the parties together and have a conversation. We could also identify in more detail whether or not it was just a misunderstanding of what was required or roles versus what was truly, you know, sort of an issue with the way the form was being implemented or the questions on the form. So, and it would also just bring us in when there were issues and not necessarily, you know, the surveys were pretty time intensive to develop, to send out with every project, and then to compile the responses and then summarize and bring them back. So having one person who's a point of contact and narrowly focusing that potential ombuds position on just working with issues related to the implementation of the climate information on the EIW form, you know, would help us make sure people knew who to contact if they had questions. And like we were saying, it could create the sort of neutral ground where that position could go back to technical experts and say, you know, what would be your recommendation, say, for this project type if they were trying to consider, you know, these types of greenhouse gas emissions? What tools do you, you know, would you think about? And then rather than have that technical expert weigh in on the decision, could provide it as a neutral party. That person could then repackage it and say, you know, here's affirming EQB's role. We are not directing you to, you know, implement this in any specific way, but here are some options for you to think about specific to this project type. And again, it's a little bit outside of EQB's traditional role, but the project is a little bit non-traditional as well, in that typically you would have, you know, like with the air emissions and the Clean Air Act, we have, you know, the Title V Air Permitting Authority with regulations and requirements and procedures already laid out to sort of support that implementation, those decision points. And so this would be sort of a non-conventional way to do that. And then, you know, again, every quarter or when ERIS meets, we could provide a summary of outreach when folks have, you know, contacted us with those concerns, what they were and how they were handled. And that seems like a much more targeted and strategic use of staff time that was focused on resolving issues instead of just observing them. So.
Thank you. Member Nelson.
Madam Chair, I wanted to just speak to, you were asking what would sort of be useful in determining the usefulness of information generated. And I have to go back and my view of things may not be totally correct, and Denise can correct me. But as folks are completing environmental review, RGU determines the adequacy of the information disclosure. And there's some check on that through the comment period, public comment, lack of doing in that. But then the information generated is supposedly going to be used to inform permit decisions. So one of the things that would help me judge usefulness would be what permitting type things would use or have used that information. I don't know how easy that is to source out. That said, I go back to having compartmentalized this decision that it's already been decided, generating this information. Looking at it is the form.
I'm sorry, you trailed off there a little bit at the end, so I just want to make sure. I don't know if anyone else heard it. I just missed the end piece of that, so I apologize.
I'll have to see if I can remember.
It was brilliant. I know that,
Oh.
but
What I was saying is I think in terms of looking at the usefulness of information, looking at what types of permits would use that information decision, because the environmental review document is just by the RGU. That said, the decision has already been made to include this information. What the EQB will consider in December.
Madam Chair, I think I heard most of that question, and I think I have some thoughts that might be helpful in thinking through sort of how this climate information might be used. And again, it's usable information. And early on, this discussion came before ERIS too, when the decision was trying to be made whether or not we include climate information. And I think we landed on, the discussion around whether or not we provide the information versus proof that it was used for a specific purpose. And so in your example, Member Nelson, you say it does inform permits. That's one aspect of the information included in an EIW, but another aspect is how a project proposer might design the process or design the project. So it might be helpful to them to go through the process, do the analysis, identify their greenhouse gas emissions, then understand that in order to reduce those emissions if they're given options between different design features. It's helpful for responsible governmental units to look at this information and say whether or not they felt the mitigation that was proposed was substantive enough, whether or not the greenhouse gas emissions were being reduced in that way. We talked earlier about sort of stream restoration projects. Well, it might be helpful, because some of the questions or prompts are about adaptation resilience. So looking at stormwater runoff in streams that might be going through, increased flow, or there may be mitigation measures that could be considered and installed based on that climate adaptation resiliency information that would increase habitat in those streams. We are also looking at construction equipment. And so is there a choice between this piece of equipment or that piece of equipment such that a decision could be made to reduce those emissions? And you would only know that if you had, the quantification without that, what the impact might be by proposing these different mitigation options. So it could be a decision factor. And then to the point of, members of the public, I have lots of examples, and my team knows I bring these out often, examples of how members of the public might use the information more broadly than just a permit decision. So it empowers members of the public to come forward and participate in a more meaningful way on those governmental approvals. So an air permit or a water permit looks at compliance with those regulations. Environmental review will often look at sort of cross-media impacts if something's coming out of the stack into the water. And then it'll highlight sort of that type of impact that may not otherwise be aware. And my one of my examples, we met with the Association of Family Physicians, and I brought this example to this subcommittee before, but they came forward and said, it's really important to them to review EAWs because they'll often look at air emissions and they'll say, oh, if that's going to increase the particulate matter in this area by this amount, we would expect to see increased asthma rates. And so they look at the information and say whether or not they should increase the staffing at their clinics to anticipate that type of environmental effect that may result in a potential health effect. And so I think it's the purpose is more broad than just informing permit decisions, I guess is my point.
I think Commissioner Arnold wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I was just gonna hop in. Denise, I think that's really helpful. And one of the things that I know Commissioner Stroman and Commissioner Daubenberger and I have talked about a lot recently is the really kind of really connected nature of a lot of the climate information. So we have energy in our team, but we also have insurance, and like, climate is largely focused on energy for a while, but insurance has a lot to do with the way that a project is resilient, and that implicates, insurers insuring in the area. And so I think that there are a lot of ways that we kind of don't appreciate, and we heard that in the very beginning. I remember one of the conversations last summer about, there were a lot of folks who put forward reasons that they might want the information. But I do wonder, just to get us back a little bit to the staff's recommendations, I wonder if maybe we sort of take this conversation and put it in the request to staff to come back with we've had like a really good, fruitful conversation here. And I wonder, Denise, I'm sure you have kind of been thinking through a variety of ways that you could propose some options back to the group to be able to, kind of articulate what a couple of support options might look like. Is that a good place to go next?
Denise.
Sorry. Madam Chair and Member Arnold, you're correct. The climate technical team has been sort of deliberating and brainstorming with ideas on how we could support the implementation of an approved EAW form. And I'd be happy to bring it back to them, and we could continue to flush out some ideas and maybe bring forward a suggestion to include in the resolution as well, taking back this conversation today.
I think that would make a lot of sense. And I'm not hearing through this discussion any concern related to, either part of the initial recommendation that came forward to us regarding the form or the continued work on the guidance. I think the question is, how do we support that implementation? And then secondly, what's our plan or schedule for, reviewing that implementation and considering additional changes? And so maybe if that's something that the technical team could take a look at and bring some options forward when this comes back to the board, I think, and obviously I'll give folks an opportunity, but to make any other comments, but I think that would cover the areas of discussion that I've heard here today and that Commissioner Arnold pointed out here. Denise, does that seem like a reasonable path from your perspective?
Madam Chair, yes, it does.
Thank you. So then I'll turn it back to members and just sort of pose the same question. Does that path make sense online, or does that path make sense in line with the conversation we've had today to resolve and make sure the board has an opportunity to hear a discussion on that and incorporate that into its final decision? Looks like Assistant Commissioner Huff has a hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I agree with the direction of this discussion, and I think I have found it very elucidating in the process. Some of if I think back a year ago when we were really discussing this pilot and the purpose of the pilot, I know one of the concerns expressed by some public members was that we were using a pilot to delay actually implementing this, and that given the just nature of the climate crisis, that we needed to move more quickly. I think the pilot was the right decision because we needed to answer some questions. We needed to answer, is this going to be too onerous on folks? Is it doable? And are we providing information that's actually useful? And for me, and Denise, you mentioned that you had 18% of the projects during that time period participated in the pilot. I think 18% is actually a very good sample. So I am, after hearing you explain again sort of what is your sample, is it representative? I feel much more comfortable about that. Pardon me, my other phone is ringing. I will also say that I think that the pilot has helped, and this discussion has helped us address those two questions. One is, it is feasible, it is doable. And there are lots of uses for the information. It's not just in a result of a permit. So I found that I think the process has helped me feel better about those two outstanding questions, which were really why we set forth with the pilot. I am compelled by the fact that in your memo and what you've talked about, doing an additional pilot probably is not, or extending the pilot, it's not going to really elicit additional information, that we probably have the information we have. Now, the thought of the process of how do we continue to support people, the commissioner's idea of an ombudsman, and to the matter that's been brought forward right now, I would agree with that and support that as we follow up on how do we make sure that the process is understandable, clear, and that technical assistance can be provided. So my kudos to the team. Really, a lot of information was gathered, a lot of outreach to the folks who were part of the pilot. And I actually feel quite good and feel it is fairly representative. So thank you very much for the great work, and I appreciate the direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that support. I'm going to make one final call for any thoughts on the path that we have summarized here and are headed on as this goes back to the technical team and then on to the board. I'm not seeing any additional hands. Director Dahl, are you seeing any?
Commissioner Stroman, I just did want to jump in also to thank the team for the work that went into this. I know this is a ton of work. I'll echo Dan's. This is, we can sit here and debate it for a while, but the team has been working really diligently and really thoughtfully about this, on this for, the last year. And I just want to commend them for the thoughtfulness and the real expertise that they've brought here today. So thank you, Denise. And I know there are more folks on the team, including Louise on my team. So I want to just make sure to give a shout out to you all and to thank you, because this makes our work maybe not easy, but at least really well informed. And I think we can consider and make decisions in a way that really moves us forward. So thank you.
Yeah, I think there's no question, the team did really thorough, excellent work. And I think I just want to note too that I think this discussion and the work of the subcommittee, and then having a little bit more time than the board has been a good move to really give it the time and attention it's due. So I believe that we might have a hand up. Is it Member Martin?
Yes, Madam Chair, we saw Nick's hand up, but now not seeing it. Mistake.
Yes, can you hear me, Eric?
We can hear you now, yes.
Great, thanks, Chair Stillman. I don't have too much to add, and I apologize for joining late. I just wanted to reinforce, having gone through the process of the pilot program, I feel similarly to Commissioner Huff that, we got a lot of information. Extending the pilot won't probably add too much more information, and the pilot really, to me, helped show that there are ways to make getting this climate-related information not overly burdensome. So I'm in favor of the suggestions that have been put forward around formalizing the process and then looking for ways to continue providing technical assistance as we discussed. So not much to add. I just wanted to chime in since I was very involved with the pilot program implementation committee.
Thank you for that, Member Martin, and thank you too. You definitely were highly engaged in that process, and I know this committee and the board appreciate it, as do the staff.
Thank you.
So let me just turn to Denise. Let me make sure that you feel good about the place the committee has landed here, and you feel like you have clear and doable direction.
Madam Chair, yes, I think this conversation has been very helpful. When we appreciate your acknowledgement of the climate technical team, that most of them are on the meeting right now, so they did hear you and appreciate your acknowledgement as well. And we look forward to continuing our work and coming back to you in December.
Excellent. I see it appears that the virtual applause has been disabled. So I know that everyone though is doing that in their heads. So just thank you again to the team. If we are done with that topic and there are no other topics on our agenda for today, then we can move to the closing and adjournment. Director Dahl, do you have any final comments before I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, no thanks. Just wanted to really congratulate Denise and the team on a well done memo and presentation.
Excellent. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move, Commissioner.
Do we have a second?
I'll move. Second, Commissioner Daubenberger.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There's never anyone opposed to adjournment. So with that, the motion carries and we stand adjourned for the day. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.